Good morning. The reading for this morning is from the book of John, chapter 14, verses 1 through 7. Jesus said, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house there have been many dwelling places. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and I will take you myself, so that where I am you may also be. And you know the way to the place where I am going." Thomas said to him, "Lord, we do not know where you are going. How will we know the way?" Jesus said to him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you know me, you will know my Father also. From now on, you do know him and you have seen him." Word of God, word of life.
Thanks be to God. Morning, New Song. How's everybody? Great. We're winding down our sermon series on the great I am statements. We began with I am the bread of life, I am the light of the world, I am the good shepherd. Before Abraham was, I am the resurrection and the life. And today we continue with I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I was blessed. My son is here somewhere. I guess he's in Sunday school. Isaiah's in town. And so Isaiah and I had a day together on Friday. And so I decided I would take him to one of my favorite places, the Gold Strike Hot Springs, because it's so wonderful, and we had such a wonderful experience the week before with the men's Bible study, which actually had a few hiccups along the way because it was a little bit more rigorous than I had thought. So as we were driving to go to Gold Strike, I thought to myself, there's another hot springs nearby Gold Strike called the Arizona Hot Springs, and I figured since it was a little bit more challenging, I would let me explore the Arizona Hot Springs instead. So I dialed my GPS up to the Arizona Hot Springs and went past the exit for the Gold Strike. And does your GPS ever kind of take you in weird places and then you just kind of find yourself, okay, so I was going along and the Arizona Hot Springs trailhead took me along, I think it was 93, past Boulder City, and then it just kind of stopped in the middle of the highway. And I looked around, and there was nothing, and so then I thought to myself, we better just go back to Gold Strike. Gold Strike is challenging, but it's also kind of this narrow canyon. It's familiar. But then shortly past where the ending point was, there was a turnaround, and then as I turned around, there emerged the parking lot for the Arizona Hot Springs, and so I knew that I'd found the place. So Isaiah and I parked in the parking lot, and we began our hike. The sign said 3.2 miles down to the hot springs. Now the thing about the hot spring trails, which is different than most of the trails if you go hiking around our neighborhood, what do? You start at the bottom of the hill, and then you climb upward, and then the journey backward is a lot easier, right? Because you're walking downhill. When you go to the hot springs, on the way down the hot springs it was very nice, but then when you get to the bottom, you have to do what? Come back up. So you do the easy part first and save the hard part for last. So Isaiah and I began our journey down the trail of this hot spring trail, and at some point along the way, we got to kind of a little fork in the road, and the lady had said you could go either way down there. And so as we got further down the hill, then the beautiful parts of the journey came in, and we were like amid these canyons, and we take these sharp round turns and everything, and we kept on waiting to get to the hot springs, but instead that took us down to the Colorado River. I don't know if you've ever gotten a chance to be like up close and personal with the Colorado River, but it's just quite breathtaking. It's just a beautiful place. It's beautiful, and there's boats and kayaks, people kind of enjoying the river. And so Isaiah and I had just a wonderful journey down the hill as we got to the hot springs. And it's easy, walking downhill, it's easy. And then somebody guided us kind of to the left. It got a little bit left, and then we finally found our way to the hot springs. there. I don't know if you know, but they have different clothing requirements at the hot springs than they do in conventional society. So it was a little unnerving. There was a dude kind of in the corner by himself that had a little bit less tire than the rest of us. So we kind of went to the other section of the hot springs, and it was really hot, but it was just fun being with Isaiah in that space. Thomas and the disciples kind of began their journey with Jesus at the top of a mountain too. I don't know if you know this, but imagine yourself being one of these people that Jesus called out and said, "Follow me," right? He said this to bunches of folks, and today we are wedded to a lot more stuff. We have a lot more attachments today. We have our material possessions, our families, our mortgages, all these different things that kind of keep us locked into our lives as our status quo a little bit, right? But even back in the day, people had attachments as well. You know, they had other jobs and families and things like that. And who are these people that would respond when Jesus called and said, "Follow me"? What is the type of person that would answer that call and just give up everything and follow Jesus? I believe that each of them in their own way, these young men, were seekers. They were kind of spiritual, yearning for a connection with the divine, yearning to be connected with God, and they could see clearly in Jesus that here was a teacher that would guide them on this pathway, enough that they were able to walk away from everything and give their whole lives to Jesus. In the Gospel of John, we get the ministry of Jesus lasting 3 years, this journey with Jesus, and we know that because there are 3 Passovers throughout the Gospel of John. And when he anoints the 12, he actually takes them to the very top of a mountain. And then he selects all of them, including Thomas, Philip, Peter, all the guys. And that's kind of symbolic, too, that they begin their journey with Jesus at the top of the hill. And for much of their time with Jesus, it is walking downhill, isn't it? I mean, it has its challenges and things like that, but they have their wind to the wind to the back as they go with Jesus on this great, grand adventure. Isaiah and I were able to look at the beautiful vistas of the Colorado River. The disciples were able to see beauty in a fundamentally different way. They got to see a front row seat of Jesus' miracles, Jesus' teachings, when all the crowds would gather around to learn from Jesus, seeing him heal and transform the lives of people. And even when he would be kind of fighting with the Pharisees and his enemies, that was actually kind of a privileged position too, because he saw them kind of put these religiously powerful people in their place. All the while, they were kind of like part of the team. That's an exciting place to be, right? And so we can watch, especially with Thomas on this journey down the hill with Jesus. Thomas will be a particular interesting person as we get to the great I am, the way and the truth and the life. Thomas was an interesting fellow because he was actually a New Yorker. Did you know that Thomas was do we have any New Yorkers in the house at all? Okay, only one New Yorker. I feel lonely here. It's a very important one, though. It's Holly. There's 2 of us, yeah. Do you know what it makes a New Yorker a New Yorker? We let you know how we feel straight away. You never have to be confused about what we're thinking or feeling because we'll let you know right away. If you step on my shoe in the subway, I'm going to let you know about it, right? If I want to know something, I just say it, right? Thomas was like that. Thomas would just say what he was feeling. How many of you had the chance to take the Myers-Briggs test before? A Myers-Briggs test is a personality type test, and you can Google it and you can take it yourself online, a little version, and there are different categories. For example, one category is, are you an introvert or an extrovert? How many of you would say that you're an extrovert? How many of you would say that you're an introvert? Oh, good. Most of the introverts don't even raise their hand because they're too shy to know. One category is, are you a thinker or a feeler? Are you a thinker or a feeler? Is your tendency to kind of let your brain process everything, or are you more emotive and a feeling person? How many would say you're a thinker? I'm kind of a thinker. How many of you really let your feelings are very central in your life, and you're really very motivated by your feelings. Yeah, Thomas. God bless Thomas. He was a feeler. How many of you would, when you think about Thomas, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Doubting Thomas? This is so unfair. What if you had your worst personality trait and everyone called you by that? Would that be nice? What would you... Lazy Lauren. Pouty Paul. Doubting Thomas. No. As we walk with Jesus on this journey and Thomas down this hill, I want you to kind of look to Thomas through a different light. After we got through with our hot springs, Isaiah and I knew that we had to make the journey back up the hill to get back to our car. And so we talked to some of the people that were fully clothed, and we we asked them just to kind of get a clarity about how to get back, because now we're going to go back on the other way back up to our car. And so they said, yeah, you just follow the wash kind of at the bottom point of in between the ranges, and you just kind of follow that up, and it'll take you back to the parking lot. And I remembered at Gold Strike, it's very kind of an easy. You can't get lost at the Gold Strike pathway. And so we began our journey, and Isaiah soon realized that the journey uphill takes a little bit more effort and strenuousness than the journey downhill, and he required more water, and sometimes he wanted me to kind of, I would push him up the hill a little bit as we walked along the way. And then guess who showed up? Naked man. But at this point, he had a towel around his waist. It was the weirdest thing, as he was hiking in the middle of the desert with a bath towel around his waist, walking up the hill. And I'm hoping he had shorts underneath at that point. I don't know. But he began to walk up, and he passed us by. Isaiah was a little freaked out, so we just let him pass by. And then he kept on ahead of us. And now here's where it got strange. Maybe it was strange already. I don't know. Okay, so we got to a point, and we were walking along the wash, and then a path intersected the wash. And not only that, but the path was going kind of off to the left, and it went up one of the mountain ranges, and the dude with the towel around his waist walked left. And so he was up in the distance, having walked left on this different pathway, and I was there with my son Isaiah, basically at a fork in the road. And you know what Yogi Berra says about forks in the road? When you find yourself at a fork in the road, take it. Which way do I go? Do I follow Towel Man? Or do I continue along the wash? Isaiah was already freaked out about the Towel Man, so we walked up the path for a while, and then we felt something about me felt like it was the wrong choice, and then we ended up going back to the wash, and we began to walk down the wash, which turned out to be the wrong direction. We were faced with confusion. Our lives, at that moment, we were kind of at a place of confoundment and confusion and uncertainty and not knowing, and we were walking uphill. For much of the time that Thomas and the rest of the disciples followed Jesus, their lives were a bit downhill. But as we continue on the journey with Jesus and the disciples continued along that pathway, they get to a point when it clearly begins to go uphill, and they clearly are facing a fork in the road, and it clearly freaks them out completely. I don't know if you've been at a place in your life where you can't see the road ahead of you, and you find yourself in circumstances where your mind can go over and over and over the same situation. You can't seem to find a pathway forward because you're so confounded and confused. Maybe it's the loss of a loved one. Maybe it's strife at home. Maybe It can be any number of things. How do we handle that when we get to that point of unknowing? That can be one of the most scary places to be in our lives, right? And it's hard to put a name to it. It's hard to kind of articulate that. And so often when we find that moment of panic, we go into fight or flight, right? Or we go into unhealthy reactions to the way we find our crises. The disciples have now come upon their third Passover with Jesus. And they've broken bread together at each of these Passovers. And in the Gospel of John, the Passover is very unique. This is when Jesus himself takes a towel around his waist and does what? Wash the disciples' feet. So now that I think about it, maybe that was Jesus trying to guide me along the way with the towel around the waist. And after he washes the disciples' feet and commands them to love one another as he has loved them, he begins this very difficult conversation with them. It's called the farewell address that Jesus gives to the disciples, and it's over 2 chapters long in the Gospel of John. He's preparing them for what's about to transpire very soon, which is he will be arrested and he will die on the cross, and he will be lifted up for the glory of God to be shown to the whole world. But he knows that these disciples, these apostles, the ones that he has chosen, will be commissioned to bear witness to the world after his death and resurrection. And he needs to prepare them, but it's extremely confusing for them, and they discover this pathway is going uphill and at a pretty steep clip, and I don't know what to do about it. And you can see their unhealthy reaction straight away. Peter has one reaction that we sometimes when we face a challenge and a crisis, the best thing to do is just pretend it doesn't exist, right? To go into denial. If we just push it off in the corner, it'll go away and it'll never come back, right? Does that work? Is that effective? Peter says, I will never abandon you, Jesus. I will lay down my life for you. And he kind of puffs his chest out, looking how great he is spiritual, and he's better than everybody else. And Jesus says to him, he chastises him, and he says, before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. Philip, another one of the disciples, he is dealing with all this chaos, and he hears Jesus say these very strange things. Jesus says to them, do not let your heart be troubled. Don't you know that my Father has a house, and he's preparing a dwelling place for each one of you? And I will prepare a place for you. And you know the way. All of which is confusing, and so Philip demands proof. He says, show me the Father, and then I will be satisfied. He demands concrete answers, and he wants it before he steps one more step forward in faith. Jesus chastises him as well. Says, how long have I been with you and you don't get it? And it is only Thomas, right? The one whom we like to call doubting. Do you know what Thomas does? He's listening to the stuff. He's hearing Jesus say, you know the way, and that there's my Father's house, and there's a place for me, and he knows that they're metaphors, but it's all very confusing. And so you know what Thomas does? Like the kid in the classroom, he raises his hand. Says, we don't know the way. Can you show us the way? He asks a question. He says, I need help. How hard it is to ask for help, isn't it? And to be vulnerable in that space. But Jesus reacts totally different to Thomas as he asks for help and says, please help me, show me the way. And Jesus responds with these very profound words, I am the way and the truth and the life. I am the way and the truth and the life. Now, this word way can actually have a couple meanings, can it? What do you think about what does the word way mean, Maddie? What do you think of, just what's a synonym of the word way? Move, yeah. It can be a road, right? Like the way is the road. But the way is also the means by which something changes, right? It's the means of the path. So Jesus is at once the path that we walk along and the means by which we can walk on that very same path. We continued to walk up the wrong pathway. And the morning had now turned into the afternoon, and the coldness had turned into heat. We were down to 1 bottle of water, and we no longer saw any human persons anymore. And we walked up the hill. Now I kind of had a strong feeling that we might be going the wrong way. But at this point, we were a good mile into the journey on the wrong direction, and I was faced with an increasingly uncertain and fearful pathway ahead. If you drive along the highway, you can see these mountains, and they kind of just go on and on and on and on and on. And my worst fears were that we were just kind of meandering along a canyon that had no end to it. Isaiah and I were totally dependent on God at this moment. And something amazing happened. The further we realized we were in trouble, the stronger Isaiah became. And when we understood that each step we had to trust that God was going to get us to our destination, Isaiah became more resolute. And we walked and we walked and walked, knowing that this uphill would eventually take us somewhere, hopefully, that would get us home. And then after our total hike ended up being about 11 miles long, we walked and we could see in the far, far, far distance a road and a semi-truck that drove by. And we knew we were going to be okay. And we walked and we actually ended up being about a mile off track from the parking lot, and we ended up hitting the highway, and we had to climb over a fence and walk along the highway, and we finally could walk each step knowing that instead of a mansion waiting for us, it was an SUV with air conditioning, but there was home for us. These disciples who were confused and had no idea what the pathway ahead was for them would have to trust that God would guide each of their steps as they helped to build the church and they helped to bear witness to the story of Jesus in the lives of total strangers. And they walked that journey knowing each and every step that Jesus is the way and the truth and the life, both the means and the pathway that provided ahead for them. And Jesus is your way, your truth, and your life. Amen.